Was the year 1990. Jetsons the movie. The Jetsons had made their name in the 1960s with their animated sitcom show, and nearly 3 decades later, they made their big motion picture debut. The story follows George Jetson, who is tasked with the running of a new spacey sprocket facility by his boss, Cosmo Spacely. However, after he brings his family along to support him, they uncover the tragic truth of the facility's location, that the facility is actually drilling into and destroying people's community, which is based inside the asteroid. The Jetsons were seen as the counterparts to the Flintstones, who were based in the Stone Age, while they were based in the Space Age, hence their world being largely influenced by the technological space revolution. It's not a movie that I watched back in the day, and judging by critics and reviews, it is not amongst the most remembered movies of the 1990s. The Freshman. All-time screen legend Marlon Brando and a young Matthew Broderick star in the American crime comedy flick. The Freshman revolves around a young New York film student Clark Kellogg's entanglement in a nefarious illicit business. Kellogg, played by Matthew Broderick, is robbed moments after arriving in New York, so when he sees his mugger several days later, he confronts him, and the mugger promises to return his property and get him a job with his uncle Carmine Sabatini, played by Marlon Brando, who, as it turns out, is a mafia boss. As Clark continues his shady work for Carmine, he discovers an elaborate underworld that has caught the attention of the authorities, offering exotic and endangered animals as specialty foods, including Clark being tasked with delivering a Komodo dragon for this purpose. Young Guns 2. Western action flick which starred some of Hollywood's youngest and brightest stars at the time in Emilio Estevez, Kiefer Sutherland, Lou Diamond Phillips, and Christian Slater. The movie follows the life of Billy the Kid in the years following the Lincoln County War, in which Billy was part of the Regulators, a group of 6 highly skilled gunmen avenging the death of John Tunstall, and the years leading up to Billy's documented passing. En route to Mexico from the United States, Billy the Kid and his associates are pursued by federal agents determined on bringing them to justice. When Billy, Doc, and Chavez prove too difficult to track down, out of sheer frustration, the authorities enlist an old friend of theirs, a reformed outlaw Pat Garrett, played by William Peterson, to take down the elusive gunslinger. As I said earlier, the movie had an all-star cast of Emilio Estevez, Kiefer Sutherland, Lou Diamond Phillips, and William Peterson. The Exorcist III. The third installment in the supernatural psychological horror. Police Lieutenant Kidderman, played by George C. Scott, notices similarities between his current murder investigation and the methods used by the Gemini killer, played by Brad Dourif. The killer was executed 15 years prior. Kidderman soon discovers a hospitalized mental patient, played by Jason Miller, claiming to be the dead serial killer, but looks uncannily like a priest Kidderman knew who died during an exorcism. As more bodies are found, Kidderman looks for connections between the 2 supposedly dead men. The film also stars the man behind the voice of the legendary doll killer Chucky, Brad Dourif. My Blue Heaven. 1990 saw the release of the crime comedy flick starring Steve Martin and Ghostbusters star Rick Moranis. There is a connection between this film and the iconic gangster flick Goodfellas, which was released about a month later. Both films are based on the life of famed American mobster Henry Hill. Vinny Antonelli, who played by Steve Martin, trades the mob for the Witness Protection Program and moves to a small suburb in California. But for Vinny, old ways die hard. He becomes a challenge for Barney Coopersmith, played by Rick Moranis, the FBI agent in charge of making sure Vinny keeps a low profile before he can testify against his former mob associates. Barney, though, might actually be able to learn a few things from Vinny, that is, if Barney can keep him alive long enough. Darkman. Future Spider-Man director Sam Raimi co-wrote and directed this superhero horror film, starring Liam Neeson as scientist Peyton Westlake. He's brutally attacked, disfigured, and he left for dead by ruthless mobster Robert Durant, played by Larry Drake. After his girlfriend, attorney Julie Hastings, played by Frances McDormand, runs afoul of a corrupt developer Louis Scheck Jr., played by Colin Friels, an experiment treatment gives Westlake superhuman strength and resilience, with the unintended side effect of rendering him mentally unstable and borderline psychotic. Consumed with vengeance, Westlake continues his research with the new goal of hunting down those who disfigured him. White Hunter, Blackheart. Clint Eastwood starred, produced and directed this adventure drama movie. It is based on the 1953 book of the same name written by Peter Vietel. Clint Eastwood plays John Wilson, a hard-living macho movie director. He arrives in 1950 Zimbabwe to prepare for his next film. Accompanied by screenwriter Peter Verriel, Wilson becomes far more interested in shooting an elephant than getting ready for the shoot. Determined, Wilson moves production to a village where a native hunter helps him in his quest. Obsessed with this goal even as filming grows more chaotic, the director begins to question the ethics and the origins of his fixation. Marked for Death. Steven Seagal's second big outing this year, as he stars as a former DEA troubleshooter, John Hatcher. Mourning the death of his partner who died in the line of duty, John Hatcher, played by Seagal, confesses to his old pal Max, played by Keith David, a high school football coach, that he has decided to retire. Then Chicago drug lord Screwface, played by Basil Wallace, puts out a hit on him and Hatcher's family. Now thirsty for vengeance, this grizzled man of action fearlessly returns to the fray, and when the skittish Screwface flees to Jamaica, Hatcher and Max are in hot pursuit. Seagal continued to live up to his billing as one of the 90s tough guy action stars in this movie. Night of the Living Dead. Late actor Tony Todd of the Candyman series stars in this horror movie remake of the 1968 classic, directed by legendary US prosthetic artist Tom Savini. Yours truly had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Savini at a Comic-Con in London back in 2008. Now, like the original, the film follows 7 strangers as they meet and survive in a rural farmhouse, following the awakening of the deceased rising as flesh-hungry zombies, fleeing from the undead horde as they continue to multiply. Tensions flare as the group argues over the best way to escape their increasingly dire situation before they are completely overrun. Quigley Down Under. Magnum star and 80s heartthrob Tom Selleck stars in this western genre movie alongside Alan Rickman and Laura San Giacomo. Quick draw gun shooting. Death Warrant. Jean-Claude Van Damme stakes his claim as one of the biggest action stars of the 90s in his action prison thriller Death Warrant. JCVD stars as police detective Louis Burke, who's going into a prison facility in California as an undercover cop in order to find out who was behind a mysterious series of murders, and finds himself locked up with his nemesis Christian Naylor, a psychotic serial killer who calls himself the Sandman, who sets out to exact his revenge. The usual Jean-Claude Van Damme movie traits with kicks, guns, action, and more action. One of the better acted JCVD movies, but this wasn't his only outing this year. Jean-Claude Van Damme also starred in the action flick drama AWOL, or Lionheart as it was known in some countries. Van Damme stars as a French foreign legionnaire who has entered an underground fighting circuit in Los Angeles as he attempts to raise money for his dying brother's family. This was the first Jean-Claude Van Damme movie that I ever watched, and whilst not my favourite JCVD movie, I think it's one of his best performances in terms of character portrayal.
Pacific Heights.
A psychological horror thriller starring Melanie Griffiths, Matthew Modine and Michael Keaton. The film follows a San Francisco couple in Pacific Heights and unwittingly rent a studio apartment inside to a psychopath. As the couple renovate the house, they look for a tenant for the first floor of their home and come across a man who has just moved into the area, Carter Hayes, played by Michael Keaton. He seems like a great guy at first, but it transpires he is a murderous con artist who plans to swindle them out of their real estate. As Haynes tries to drive them out of their own home, the couple must take drastic measures and fight back. On its opening weekend, it managed to knock Goodfellas off the top spot and make $7.1 million at the US box office. It would go on to make around $55 billion worldwide. Keaton was largely praised for his portrayal as the villainous Carter. The critics were a mixed bag. Some praised it, but others felt it stuck too closely to the well-worn thriller conventions. At the time of doing this video, this was not a film that I was aware of, but by the trailers alone, and Keating having already played Batman the year before, you can see that he made for a very effective villain. Now, whilst not one of the most remembered films of the 1990s, there's certainly something worth looking at. The Godfather Part III. One of the all-time great epic gangster flicks came back for the third time. Legendary Al Pacino returning as Michael Corleone. Andy Garcia stars as Vincent Corleone. An aging Michael attempts to legitimize his family's business and remove them from the mafia, but his efforts are complicated by a power struggle within the Vatican, a feud with a rival gangster, and the rise of his feisty nephew Vincent on top of his romantic interest in Michael's daughter Mary, which leads to tragedy. In 1979, Michael is nearly 60 years old and haunted by his past, particularly the murder of his brother Fredo. He makes millions in a charitable donation and he seeks to legitimize the Corleone family by buying a large stake in the Vatican-run property company called International Immobiliare. Due to unforeseen complications, Vincent, the illegitimate son of Sonny Corleone, arrives and becomes involved with the family. Vincent's ambitions and desire for Mary create conflict as Michael does not want his daughter involved with the crime family. A power struggle erupts within the Vatican as figures like Don Lucheski try to maintain control and steal from Corleone's investments. This is linked to the death of Pope John Paul I, and this leads to a tragic climax. The story culminates at an opera in Sicily where Michael's son Anthony is performing. During an opera, an assassin, Mosca, shoots Michael, but the stray bullet hits and kills Mary. Vincent retaliates, killing Mosca, but Michael is devastated by his daughter's death. The film ends with a montage of Michael's past and then shows him, much older, dying alone in Sicily. His final damnation after failing to escape the world of the Corleones. Whilst not as successful as the first two movies, the cultural impact of the film cannot be denied. Parts of the film are very loosely based on real historic events concerning the ending of the papacy of Pope Paul VI and the very short tenure of Pope John Paul I in 1978 and the collapse of the Banco Ambrosiano in 1982. The film was nominated for 7 Academy Awards but ultimately failed to win any. And in the blow to the film's legacy, it received 2 Golden Raspberry Awards for Worst Actress given to the unfortunate Sofia Coppola. The film had a further 9 minutes of deleted footage added to a later release of the film, which would be known as the Director's Cut. A movie which concluded the Godfather story, and whilst not as successful, it is a classic all-time gangster movie. Goodfellas. From one classical gangster movie to the next. I end this run of 1990 movies with a film many consider one of the greatest gangster epic dramas of all time, directed by Martin Scorsese, adapted from the 1985 non-fiction book Wise Guy, written by Nicholas Pileggi. Goodfellas tells the true story of Henry Hill, an associate of the American-Italian Mafia, and his integration into the criminal world, and his eventual exit. This is told between the 1950s and the 1980s. The film chronicles the rise of Henry along with his friends Jimmy Conway and the violent and unstable Tommy DeVito. Through a series of escalating crimes, they lead a luxurious and very violent lifestyle. The film also depicts Henry's descent into drug addiction. Henry Hill is drawn to the glamour of the mafia lifestyle and starts working for local gangster Paulie Cicero, alongside the hijacker Jimmy and Tommy. The trio becomes successful through a number of crimes including carjacking and cargo theft. They amass a big fortune and they live a life of lawlessness and luxury. Over time, their antics lead to a key moment when Tommy, Jimmy and Henry murder Billy Batts, a rival mobster, which leads to a sense of growing danger for the trio. Tommy is then later lured into a false initiation thinking he's going to be a made man, but is ultimately taken out in retribution for Batts' death. On top of that, Henry's increasing drug use leads to him being in a paranoid and erratic state. He sets up another drug deal with his Pittsburgh associates, but he's arrested by narcotics agents and he's sent to prison. Eventually, Henry provides information to the FBI, leading to his entry into the witness protection program as he testifies in court. This leads to Jimmy and his boss Paulie being incarcerated. This sees his exit from the world of organized crime and is forced to live an average lifestyle for the rest of his days. And in the final moments of the scene, he describes that as him being a schnook. Goodfellas is described as one of the greatest films ever made, especially in the gangster genre. As widely regarded as the movie was, it did not make the top 10 high-grossing films of 1990, but it did go on to gross $47 million on a $25 million budget. It received an overwhelming positive response by the critics, with Rotten Tomatoes giving it a 94% score. Goodfellas is a classic gangster and arguably the high point of Martin Scorsese's career. Famed film critic Roger Ebert gave the film a full 4 stars and wrote, "No finer film has ever been made about organized crime. Not even The Godfather." High praise indeed. It won a slew of awards, including Best Actor for Joe Pesci at the Academy Awards, 5 at the British Academy Awards ceremony for Best Film, Best Director for Martin Scorsese, Best Screenplay, Best Editing, and Best Costume Design. And it won a number of other awards. When it comes to all-time movies, Goodfellas is usually on this, especially when it comes to gangster movies, with only The Godfather coming ahead. There is just no doubt in the long-lasting legacy this film has had on the industry and pop culture entertainment in general. It is simply one of the greatest films ever made. And that brings an end to the movies of 1990, a very long and exhaustive list to get through. But that was the heyday of the 90s, with so many of these classics being released, and it was only the beginning of the decade. And what a way to usher in a new era of great movies. The movies for 1990 are done, but there is still the animated shows and the video games to emerge for this year, and I will be going over these in the follow-ups to this video, so stay tuned. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this rundown memory lane revisiting some of these great gems from 1990. That is it for now. I'm K-Man of Smartface Entertainment, and I will see you on the next video.
Was the year 1990.